say blacks hate blacks, it's not just a myth. Why we do not have the same respect for members of our race as we do for some other race, especially the white race. And that we were told, quite to the contrary, that we were from a land of savages, of cannibals. And except by the grace of God and the white man, we would have been a lost people. So we should be on our knees forever praying and thanking God that we were brought, even in slavery, to this land to escape the horrors of Africa. And this was brought in and drilled into us generation after generation.
Africa, the second largest continent, is an area of almost 12 million square miles in size. It is comprised of 50 independent countries and populated by over 537 million people who speak over 1,000 languages and dialects. For eons, Africa's wealth has been a magnet that has attracted the entire world. The continent has been plundered for its vast mineral and human resources. Traditional historians have viewed this land as one of primitive savages who slept through the millennia, contributing little to the cultural legacy of mankind. The facts, however, tell a different story. Scholars and scientists now concede that Africa is the birthplace of mankind. Africans were the first builders of civilization. They discovered mathematics, invented writing, developed sciences, engineering, medicine, religion, fine arts, and built the Great Pyramids, an architectural achievement which still baffles modern science. What caused the cradle of the world's oldest and greatest civilizations to crumble, leaving in its wake a people who are exploited, oppressed, and economically underprivileged? In a moment, Africa's downfall.
Tony Brown's Journal is brought to you by Pepsi-Cola Company and your local Pepsi bottlers.
Dr. Williams, it's an honor being able to meet with you and to talk with you. You have written what many of us consider to be the definitive work about the culture of Africans throughout the world, and you approach it from the standpoint of the destruction of that civilization. Why did you choose the aspect of destruction rather than some other point of view?
The aspect of destruction was emphasized for the reason that it was quite clear that the black people in America seemed to be generally unaware that they had a history, that they were told that they had achieved nothing. They were told...
This man says the true facts are to be found in a more thorough and honest look at history. After Dr. Chancellor Williams, a native of Bennetsville, South Carolina, received his doctorate in history and sociology, he studied psychology, anthropology, archaeology, and economics. He also taught Arabic history and worked as a professor of history at Howard University for 29 years. He won an award from the Black Academy of Arts and Letters and was the first recipient of the 21st Century Foundation's Clarence L. Holt Prize for Excellence in Literature.
Now, of course, the record was there to show that much of Western civilization was built upon the foundation of the land where civilization itself had begun, and this was in Africa. Therefore, the focus had to be on Africa to see to what extent the recent revelations with the turn of the century, at the turn of the century, that Africa was the cradle of civilization. To what extent could this be actually verified? And so my work was directed in the uncovering much of what had been lost, much of what had been disguised, much of what had been stolen, refurbished, reworked, and presented to Western civilization as the work brought from Africa but present to Western civilization as the creation of Western man.
Dr. Chancellor Williams spent 16 years writing his book, and although a piece of extraordinary research, he considered it a greater miracle that he was able to get it published. Plagued by a chronic lack of funds and turned down by his academic associates and all other sources, Dr. Williams mortgaged his home. Then another obstacle arose. Due to his rapidly failing eyesight, he was forced to abandon his earlier plans for an expanded 3-volume work and had to settle for a condensed version of his research into a single volume, the book we now know as The Destruction of Black Civilization, Great Issues of a Race from 4500 BC to 2000 AD.
What did you find out about ancient African civilizations?
Well, to begin with, I found out that ancient African civilization was, first of all, the beginning of civilization. I found out that there could be no record found anywhere that antedates the advanced civilization of Africa. And this was the finding of European and other scholars. And they were now gradually admitting it, and when the evidence became overwhelming, the question arose, could Africans have achieved all this? Could Africans have achieved this remarkable work in architecture that could be traced back for thousands of years before Christ, before Western civilization had even started? Could Africans have done this? Could Africans have achieved this high advance in mathematics, in physics, in chemistry, in medicine, and so forth? I mean, many of the things we now glorify as modern. Take the Washington Monument, for example, which is an exact duplication of ancient African architecture, which is well known. And most of the columns we see on these stately columns on buildings, which the Greeks, in studying in Africa, are borrowed from the Africans, remodeled them at Doria, at Corinth, and so forth, gave these columns the name of the cities in which they remodeled them, and gave them a Greek character. They really didn't do much changing. They merely removed the Africa and the canthus leaf at the column and modified, but otherwise it was substantially the same as Africa.
Dr. Williams, were there ever laws and rules that governed the entire continent of Africa?
There were laws and rules that governed the entire continent in the same sense that you have the same system of laws and rules that which govern a whole people without the same time having a single government, a single state spreading over a whole continent, the second largest in the world. In other words, I'm saying that while Africa, in contradistinction to being a country, was the second largest continent on earth, and while the African people at one time in history occupied the whole continent, and while they were one people in their general culture, in their general religion, with certain modification, in their general social laws, in their general legal system, right on down the line, in almost every avenue you could find that there was this kinship. The only thing that they fundamentally different, or where they fundamentally differed, was where, of course, when they divided up and formed separate states, or withdrew, or to form separate societies, and developed different languages from the segmentation or separation from what had been a larger language group, so that there's no problem at all in understanding that you had one people occupying the continent without being under one single state.
Dr. Williams, based on your research of history, is it accurate that democracy was born in Greece?
No, democracy was not born in any one place. The record, as I indicate in this discussion on the chapter dealing with the African Constitution, birth of democracy, meaning birth of democracy in Africa, I made it quite clear that democracy was a system that was natural among the ancient peoples in all stages of development. Even the most primitive societies had their chiefs generally elected, and the chiefs were generally subject to the will of the group. So it was nothing unusual about the head of the society being subject to the will of the tribe, which was one of the early forms of social organization. The family, the clan, the tribe, the nation, which is the progressive step. So that in Africa, you'll find that back from times immemorial, they had their own system of democracy. And it was this same system which could be found in every part of the African continent. The same fundamental laws, the same fundamental custom. No matter whether they were 5,000 miles apart, no matter whether the group had never come across the other group, they had the same system. That's why we know that we were dealing with substantially one people. So that democracy then was so long, so many thousands of years before Greece, that the mention of Greece in connection with where democracy began could only bring smiles to the face of any scholar who has really studied world history.
What were some of the specific African cultures, civilizations?
These civilizations, I refer to them, of course, generally as the great kingdoms and the great or the empires that existed all over the continent of Africa. To the south, perhaps the greatest, at least one of the greatest, was the empire of Monomotapa, of which the present Zimbabwe is a part of what was once a much larger empire. And then, of course, those empires of Mali and of Ghana, ancient Ghana, and of Shanghai, and of the Marsi states, and so on. Many of these countries had started in a period long before Christ was born. Ghana, for example, had for over 400 kings listed before Christ was born. so that these were ancient empires. The most important thing here, though, to note about these empires and our last name is that all the people in America, all the blacks or Africans in America, came from this area of great nations, of a great educational system, where the greatest university of the time in which these slaves were being brought to America still was flourishing in its glory. That is, of course, the University of Sankor. The great civilizations in Nigeria, all of these were advanced cultures. So these people didn't come, as they were told and came to believe after they had lost memory of their homeland by the system of not allowing people of the same language group to be sold to the same plantation, but scattering them all over the South so that you wouldn't form a power base by having a lot of Africans speaking the same language. So this helped by this breakdown of intercommunication among themselves, helped them to lose memory. But we were told, quite to the contrary, that we were from a land of savages, of cannibals. And except by the grace of God and the white man, we would have been a lost people. So we should be on our knees forever praying and thanking God that we were brought, even in slavery, to this land to escape the horrors of Africa. And this was brought in and drilled into us generation after generation. Until even today, after we're going through from the kindergarten through graduate school, the majority of blacks today reject the idea of being called an Afro-American.
Dr. Williams, if all of the things you say are true, if Africans had such advanced civilizations, hundreds of kings and one African kings in one kingdom before Jesus Christ was born, how did Africans worldwide and Afro-Americans get in the shape they're in? How did these great kingdoms, this great civilization, fall to civilizations that didn't come along until thousands of years after theirs were already established?
Well, it wasn't done overnight. Their great empires were built through their industry, through their enterprising, through their industry in so many fields. And the whole societies, as I point out in the book, in practically all of them, were organized in lodges. This is where the organization of workers, but they regard themselves as craftsmen. And each working group, whether it's building boats, or whether they were stone masons or brick masons, or whether they were carpenters or whatnot, each craft was organized into a lodge. In fact, the educational system was similarly organized on a basis of 3 levels. And so you had a society that went in for production. The people who were specialized in growing rice or cotton or peppers or what have you did so not as Africans do today. Africans hardly get Africans generally today to go on a subsistent level. Just enough for themselves, as though they're scared to produce a surplus for export and to sell to areas which do not produce the same things which they produce, and buy from the other people the things which the other people produce and which they don't have, which is trade, which is progress, which is the basis of wealth worldwide. See what they're talking about, Reaganism and that sort of stuff. There isn't anything new. The Africans were doing that tens of thousands of years ago, a system of life. So they had regular trading posts established in different villages in other countries. They had trading routes that crossed the Sahara into other lands, with merchandise, camels loaded with merchandise of spices, whatever the people could do. They were an industrious people. And they sold, and they would import as well as export. And this is what made them great. I try to emphasize that when you talk about the great African empires, they didn't just become great overnight, just great. No, they became great by doing specific things. They were great people. They were industrious people. They were builders. They were producers. The whole nation was fired to produce, and they were rewarded for their work. And so they built cities and so forth and so forth. And so this is why you had this great system of nation building becoming so mighty. Now, why did they fall? They fell when this began to decline internally, and when the external forces, over centuries of effort, finally gained the day. These nations had strict laws barring foreigners from coming to the interior. Then the same system of gradually settling around the borders, that is foreign traders, and supposed to be traders, but most of them were geographers and others representing the foreign, would establish little trading posts, just ask for permission to establish trading posts on the border. We don't want to come in, we just want to do business with you. We want to sell you what we have, we want to buy some of what you have. Well, the Africans were great traders, always great traders. So that was one of the weaknesses. They allowed them to settle along the borders, for one thing. The second thing that happened, and this went on, as I point out in the destruction, for several thousand years before the certain countries were finally taken. And when they were taken, like Egypt, look how many times Egypt was taken and retaken.
You say blacks gave up Egypt. Are you saying the Egyptians were black?
Of course the Egyptians were black. The name comes from the name itself, has an origin in the name of a black king. So that it became, the Egyptians were black until it became otherwise. They're not black today, and they're just like those who occupy the northern part of the Sudan are not black today. They are partly Arab, mostly Arab, and some of them are mixed, the Afro-Arabs, you might call them.
You spend quite a bit of time in your book describing the ancient civilization of Ethiopia. What is it you find important about that civilization?
Well, the ancient civilization of Ethiopia was the civilization of what we're talking about when we talk about that whole stretch of land from the Mediterranean to the source of the Nile, which was ancient Ethiopia. So Egypt was nothing but what we call Egypt now, which was Chem, before the name was changed, was nothing but a northern province of the Ethiopian Empire.
You have a chapter here, Ethiopia's oldest daughter, Egypt. And I'd like to read you a statement you made and get you to comment on it. You say, the melting pot of the races began around the northern perimeter. The end result was always the same. The blacks were pushed to the bottom of the social, economical, and political ladder, whenever and wherever the Asians and their mulatto offsprings gained control. Why is that? Why if with this advanced African civilization, when they interfaced with members of other groups, why did the members of that civilization always end up on the bottom of the ladder?
We have always been, as I repeatedly point out, the race of brotherhood seekers. We have been the one who forever have carried on the drive for brotherhood with other people. they have never sought brotherhood with us, never, except for expediency, where they saw an opportunity to play the role of big brother for a while they gain effective control. Now, they're cunning, you see. They study us, and they know this. They have certain basic advantages. They can easily win our confidence, first of all, because Africa, the whole continent of Africa, was known as the land of the religious people. We were always, we didn't start all this religion in America, being more religious than the whites. No, this is an African characteristic. We were known from ancient times as the land of the spiritual people, the land of the gods, because we were so religious. The blameless people, Homeless wrote. We were so religious. So this must be kept in mind in this general appraisal.
How significant was the oral historian in the reconstruction of African history?
Well, the oral historian is indispensable if you're going to make a comparative study of history, in which you're going to compare what had been written, and since it all was written by foreigners, with what the Africans themselves had written, and the records of their mind, and the records of their mind turned out to be as accurate, as unerring in many respects as what is written in books.